Hello, Assalamu alaikum, and welcome to another Tabadlab Live. This is Hiba, Senior Associate, Center for Digital Transformation at Tabadlab. And today we're delving into the fascinating realm of crypto. Cryptocurrency emerged as this disruptive, powerful force that promised to revolutionize the financial world and create innovative new experiences and opportunities across a host of other sectors. The onset of this era does not only indicate a shift in monetary systems, rather it challenges the entire paradigm of conventional financial models. The way cryptocurrency is structured, the way it happens, is in direct contrast and directly challenges how we have previously practiced finance and how we have previously understood what the financial world means. As is the case with most shifts and most revolutions, this does come with its own aspirations, risks, hopes. But at the end of the day, the critical key question remains, is crypto really the future of the financial world? To further unpack, dissect, and demystify what crypto is, what does it mean, what value does it hold for us, what value does it hold for the world, and then for developing countries like ours, we're joined today by Salahuddin Khawaja. Assalamu alaikum. Salah has an undergraduate from LUMS in computer science and a master's in telecommunication and management from Syracuse University in 1999. He spent the last 20 years as a digital transformation professional on the Wall Street, initially working as a management consultant and then shifting into the banking sector. He is also, in addition to this, the CEO of Decklaration, a tech company helping clients across the digital life cycle. He also founded XWave, which is an edtech initiative that empowers underprivileged students to learn digital and take advantage of these new skills to create opportunities for themselves. But the most interesting thing about Salah is he has been into crypto for 10 years now and seeing the potential of blockchain and buying Bitcoin in 2014 and then Ethereum 2016. And that is why we have you here today. I'll start off the conversation by talking about how Bitcoin had a crazy run and then peaked at somewhere around 67K. And then crypto broadly peaked at 28 trillion market cap with this crazy buzz around metaverse, kya hota hai, iske kya advantages hain. Governments were going cray trying to figure out कि इसके इर्द-गिर्द regulations kya honi chahiye. And there's a lot to speak about that. There's a lot to talk about use cases kya bante hain, iske risks kya hain, opportunities kya hain. But before we go there, can we just take a step back and can you please help us understand crypto ka matlab kya hai? How did we end up here? What has been this evolution of the financial world? We keep hearing these words, but I don't think a lot of us understand what this really means and what a powerful tool crypto really can be. So over to you.
I appreciate the warm introduction. And the way I think about crypto is basically the history of mankind. And there's a lot of complexity around technology and security and SHA-256 and Merkle trees, etc. But it's actually really easy to understand crypto when you think about it from a ledger perspective and a trust perspective. So let me show you from the beginning of kind of humankind, right? And then trace it all the way to where we are today. So humans started living together. We were nomads and we were moving all over the place. And the concept of city life started about 13,000 years ago. And at that point, if you think about the concept of barter, right? Where someone's got wood and another person's got wheat and another person's got sugar, there's this trade happening.
Yeah.
So where is all of those accounts of the transactions happening? They're happening in the memory. And that's how the trust happens, right? That I gave you, 5 pieces of wood and you gave me 2 kilograms of sugar, and that trust is over here. So about 13,000 years ago, city life started. 5,000 years ago, humans started to realize, hey, we can actually write this down. And this is why writing was invented. And this was actually a very interesting moment for me. I was in a museum in Seattle. I actually didn't know why writing was invented. Writing wasn't invented to communicate. Writing was actually invented to maintain a ledger, because that basically enhanced trust. Writing was better than what was in your head. And the monks actually started basically writing down a hisab, a ledger for beer distribution. And you can see it in the form of a clay tablet, right? And they started writing this down. So this is about 5,000 years ago.
And that is so interesting because the usual conception has been that communication can start with it, but it starts from the financial world then.
Yeah, and it's about transactions, right? All of this goes together, right? Transactions, trust, ledger. Because if you can write stuff down, you enhance trust. So if we now fast forward to 2,500 years ago, humans invented coins, and coins were typically gold coins and other commodities, and they were used as a method of transactions. So 1,200 years ago, currency was invented in China, and currency was a paper currency that was backed by a hard commodity and redeemable in gold. And the idea was that when people are trying to barter, they have to want the other same good.
Yeah.
But now you've got a common medium of exchange, right? And you use that currency, and you can redeem it for gold. So fast forward to about 600 years ago to Italy. The Medici family invented banking. What's banking? Banking is actually a ledger.
Yeah.
So I have 1,000 lira, I give it to the Medici family, they write down in a khata, in a ledger, hey, here's 1,000 lira. It's Salah has 1,000 lira. I withdraw 100, I add a 500, they're maintaining all of that in a ledger. So this is now the evolution of ledgers into this, right? What's modern day banking, right? Think of your checking account, your credit card account, your trading account. It's actually a ledger.
Yep.
So all of this is like super, super connected, right? Trust, ledger, currency, etc. Now you think about blockchain. Blockchain is this way of keeping an immaculate, perfect ledger. There's a lot of technology behind it, etc. But you don't need to trust the Medicis. You don't need to trust Habib Bank. You don't need to trust JP Morgan. The technology is maintaining the ledger perfectly. Have you ever heard of Bitcoin being hacked? No, right?
Yep.
Wallets get hacked, just like my physical wallet. If I forget it over here, okay, that's my fault, right? But you've heard of banks getting hacked. Bitcoin's never been hacked. It's this perfect technology that keeps it all together. And so this is like this entire history, right? And you can think of it as Ledger 1.0, Ledger 2.0, Ledger 3.0, and Bitcoin being Ledger 4.0. And the same thing in parallel is around coins, right? Coins was money 1.0. Then you had paper currency 2.0. And what I didn't mention early was this entire experiment of fiat currency is approximately 50 years old. It's actually a very small period of time in terms of this human expanse of history, right? And this experiment is going to it's already miserably failing, and it will continue to fail, right? I was mentioning when I moved to the US, this was in the late 90s, a Big Mac meal was $3,
Yeah.
right? Today, a Big Mac meal in New York is $12, $13. So we in Pakistan sit and think, oh, US dollar is great. Yeah, it's much better than the rupee. But the dollar itself is not a great store of value. And this traces it back to the fiat world, right? In the 1970s, basically countries around the world started to decouple from commodities. So they could just print money. And the minute that started happening, it started devaluing. And so this experiment and the fact that humans have hundreds of currencies around the world is slowly going to wrap up. And more, I think the thesis is that Bitcoin is going to become basically the fundamental ledger, fundamental currency for the world. And applications, just like applications were built on the internet, applications will be built on Bitcoin. And that's kind of the overall kind of history. And that takes us to where we are today in terms of Bitcoin is around an $800 billion market cap entity, if you will. So if people think about it as a niche product, it's a bunch of techies doing it, it's absolutely wrong, because literally, and we'll show you in a subsequent chart here, that Bitcoin's up there with like companies like Tesla and Apple and Google and Nvidia.
So at the end of the day, ये भी उसी तरह की एक asset है आपके पास, essentially at the end of the day.
You got
and it doesn't differentiate from other assets. It's just in terms of the financial world, right?
Yep, that's it. So I mean, another way to think about it, and especially young people will immediately get this, right? Young people who have lived growing up in a phone, everything's digital.
Yeah.
Right? Your communication is digital, right? Your entertainment is digital, right? Communication with WhatsApp or your entertainment via Netflix, right? So why isn't currency digital?
Fair question, especially in today's day and age. But Salah, I would want to go a bit deeper into this. When we started off, we said Bitcoin and crypto overall really challenges the fundamentals of how we understand finance today. Could I push you a little to say more on that, just also in terms of decentralized finance ka kya matlab hai, and how is crypto and how is Bitcoin and how is blockchain really enabling that? And my second question, which I would just couple with this, is ये I think सबने किसी point पे सोचा हुआ है crypto और Bitcoin में क्या फर्क है? Where do we draw the line?
Yeah.
Is one a subsidiary of another? But it'd be great to have your input on that as well.
So I think the first thing to understand is around decentralization. It's a big word, and people who aren't familiar with it think of it as in a complicated way, and it is somewhat complicated. If you think about human history over the last 500 years, 1,000 years, it was all about centralization. You know, a pope was in power, an imam was in power, a general was in power, a king was in power, a president was in power, a principal of a school was in power, a rector of a university was in power. It's all about centralization. They controlled everything. They controlled communication. So, you know, radio was a one-to-many communication mechanism. TV back in the day was a one-to-many, you know, communication mechanism. So it's all centralization. The pendulum has now shifted to decentralization. Decentralization, if I have a viewpoint, I don't need a radio station. I just go on Twitter and I share my view, right? And that's decentralized. It's like many-to-many communication. So in a similar way, you would rely on a bank to be the central entity, whether it's the State Bank of Pakistan or the Federal Reserve in the US, or banks, consumer banks like, you know, JP Morgan and Bank of America, or, you know, over here you have Habib Bank and Al-Falah, right? These are central entities that you'd entrust. But what if you could decentralize it? And that's the beauty of the Bitcoin revolution, in particular, and crypto broadly, right? That Bitcoin is decentralized. There are 15,000 nodes, or the way to think about a node is that it's the ledger, it's the Bitcoin ledger.
Okay.
15,000 people are maintaining the Bitcoin ledger instantaneously. So if I send you $100 worth of Bitcoin, that transaction shows up on 15,000 nodes.
Right, and that's how they're also maintaining transparency, and the trust is then very mutual. एक तो technology में trust है, but दिख रहा है सारों को कि क्या हो रहा है.
And that's why it's decentralized and the trust is there. Now let's say you and I get into a fight and I go to your village, and usually like there's a concept of a patwari who's maintaining the land record, right? So if I'm pissed off at Hiba, I'm gonna basically slip the patwari a lakh rupees, and suddenly the land that Hiba owned is in my name. There's no trust. So now think about why trust is so important, because the more there is trust, there's more economic activity, right? Countries like Pakistan aren't getting ahead because there isn't a lot of trust. But technology enables that trust, because here you've got 15,000 patwaris, 15,000 nodes maintaining the network together. So you can't bribe the patwari. And that's why you've never heard of Bitcoin being hacked. There's a whole concept of mining that sits on the side of it that also protects the 15,000 nodes. And we can talk about that. That's a bit more technical. And that's what this whole decentralized aspect is. And there's another aspect, again, it's a big word and people can, you know, get scared of it. It's permissionless. Right now, if I need to basically go and open up a bank account, I need permission. With Bitcoin, it's permissionless. I don't need permission to open up a Bitcoin account. And that's the beauty of it. And there's a parallel with email, right? Do I need permission to create an email account? Do I need permission to send emails? Right? Is there any KYC, right? Where like the government is monitoring my email? Do you not think there's terrorist activity in email? Right? Of course there is. But communication is not being monitored, right? Same thing with financial transactions. Why are financial transactions monitored? Why are financial transactions, why do I need permission to do financial transactions? And I think slowly but surely the world's going to wake up to, hey, there's nefarious activity going on everywhere. But why do I need permission to send money? Why is the government involved in that? It's my personal, it's my money. And it's my, like, let's say if I had gold and I was going to give you that gold, I don't need permission to give you that gold. Bitcoin is digital gold, right? I can move billions of dollars of Bitcoin like this, but I can't move billions of dollars of gold like this. And that's the whole revolution.
That's such an interesting point, and I'm very excited to get deeper into it. But I'm going to hold on to this thought, this entire idea about आप उसको regulate नहीं कर सकते हैं, and that's the beauty of it. But I know there are people on the other side who don't see it as the beauty and see it as the risk that it comes with. But I'm going to hold on to that thought, and we're going to circle back to it towards the end because I do want to connect the dots.
Sure.
And I do seem excited, and I am really excited. But I just want to talk about, I think the next question that has been in everyone's mind is, 2 साल पहले क्या हुआ था? Because we know there was this entire hype and buzz and craze around Bitcoin. You had people from the popular culture taking over it. सब बात कर रहे थे, सब खरीद रहे थे. There was competition. It was word of mouth. Everything was happening. And then suddenly it really evaporated 2 years down the lane. I just want to understand, what happened? Can you walk us through ye kya tha? And is this reflective of crypto's depth, or is this just the regular course or the trend it had to follow and reach a plateau? Or is this something that we should be really really worried or concerned about?
Yeah, I think the best way to understand this is that if you think about compounding, right? And we have some charts around compounding, so I'm happy to pull those up over here. And Einstein basically says how compounding is the 8th wonder of the world. So it's actually a very simple example, right? Let me just take this piece of tissue paper, right? This is, let's say, 1 millimeter thick.
Yeah.
So Hiba, I'm going to ask you a question. I'm going to flip the script here. So let's say I ask you to fold it once.
Yep.
Then I ask you to fold it twice.
Yes.
Thrice.
Yes.
4, 5, 6, up to 50 times. That 1 millimeter piece of tissue paper, how high does it go?
So about 50 times its original height?
Yeah.
If you're folding it 50?
Yeah. So it's compounded.
Yeah.
So 1 becomes 2, 2 becomes 4, 4 becomes 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, 256, 512, 1000. I've only done 10 turns or so, right? When you do it 50, it actually goes all the way to the moon and even beyond, right? And that's the power of compounding, right? That when you move in such compounded nature, like that percentage increase, it's just absolutely nutso, right? And so if we move on to kind of the next slide here, it actually shows, how basically the exponential wave just goes up, right? To understand how when technology adoption happens, it actually happens exponentially. So initially, about 100 years ago, you had the landline, you had electrification, you had even like the concept of a laundry, right? Like a washing machine. That adoption happened over decades. But now think back, right, in recent history, how quickly did smartphone adoption happen? So technology patterns adoption happened kind of with a slope like this earlier. Now they're happening like this. Look how fast the internet was adopted, how fast the smartphone was adopted. And we're going to get into this in a little bit later, because I've got some amazing charts on Bitcoin and how the adoption is happening in just a steep way. So now, with all that background, sorry for the long background there and the long context, to understand what happened a few years ago, when you have these exponential patterns, right, there's a lot of exuberance, right? And so people get ahead of their skis. There's a lot of false narratives. Yeah. There's a lot of shenanigans going on in this space, right? Like, and this is actually an important point, and maybe a small tangent, and kind of come back to your question. There was shenanigans happening in my old world in Wall Street. You had, Bernie Madoff, and you had a whole slew of other issues there that didn't make banking bad. So I think in the same context, right, there are shenanigans in crypto. There are people who will take advantage because there's money to be made here, right? And there will be false narratives or false advertising and straight out cons, right? And that happens when you have these huge exponential waves, right? So people get ahead of their skis and then it gets adjusted. And so there's a lot of narratives around, DeFi and metaverse. And I think there's a lot of legitimacy in that space. And there was an earlier question you had asked about, Bitcoin and crypto. And there's this, and just like in real life, in politics or you have factions. So in crypto, you have this faction that and what they're called the Bitcoin maximalists. They basically think it's Bitcoin, and pardon my French here, but everything else is a shitcoin. Everything else is just bad, right? And I've become a Bitcoin maximalist in one dimension, where from a monetary perspective, I think Bitcoin is the answer. Everything else, whether it's legitimate projects, potentially like Ethereum and Solana and others, they may have some interesting use cases, but from a monetary perspective, because of the 21 million cap, right? I think Bitcoin's won it, right? Nobody.
Sorry, I'm interrupting, but this is very exciting. Could you explain why? I know you said it's from a monetary point of view, but could we go a bit deeper into that? Kyun uski monetary value bakiyon se kyun zyada hai aur kyun behtar hai? I'm just trying to make sure we all understand why you became a maximalist.
Because it's actually the most elegant monetary policy, right? It's engineered money. And this is another reason why I think, like, from my old world, like, you've got Jamie Dimon, the CEO of JP Morgan, right? He just doesn't get it, right? And he's got a vested interest in banking, but he's not an engineer. This is in many ways an engineering revolution to finance.
And Bitcoin is defining the curve for it. And that's why you're more sure about it being better.
100%. Because here's the thing. If I ask you a simple question, do you know what the State Bank of Pakistan is going to do in the next 5 years? Interest rates, money printing. Do you know what the Federal Reserve is going to do in the next 5 years? I can tell you exactly what Bitcoin is going to do in the next 100 years. Because
so there's a lot of predictability there as well.
It's not a lot. It's completely predictable. The monetary policy is defined in a simple white paper. It's coded into the system. You know exactly the release schedule for Bitcoin. The only thing you don't know is demand. But the demand ebbs and flows. But the supply is and the release schedule of how Bitcoin is being released is exactly fixed. And so it's super, super elegant, super, super simple. And you know exactly what's happening. There's no variability to, oh, is interest rates going to go up? Is it going to go down? Are we in tightening or loosening? None of that, right? It's the base layer, the money, like we talked about ledger and trust and all that, right? That base layer is going to become really, really simplified. You know, like, you know how much gold is going to be mined this year, next year? If gold prices shoot up from $2,000 to $5,000, right? Are we suddenly going to be mining gold in K2 because it's profitable to mine gold in K2, right? And suddenly the supply of gold will go up. Yeah. So you don't know that whole supply demand equation keeps changing. Here, Bitcoin's supply is capped at 21 million. And there's a release schedule. It's defined in the concept of halving. It gets a little technical and we can go there. And that makes it really, really simple. And so from that perspective, the monetary use case, you know, whether it's a store of value, unit of account, medium of exchange, it's very clear Bitcoin's won that, right? And store of value is kind of like a done deal with the 800 billion market cap. And it's just a matter of time where we figure out how to send Bitcoin in a much cheaper way.
Yeah.
And there's layering solutions like, you know, Lightning, et cetera, that are gonna solve it. So I think it's a pretty fascinating space. But there are other use cases that I'm a little TBD on. And I think the pure Bitcoin maximalists might, you know, kind of hate me for this. But I think there are other areas potentially for blockchain to apply in ways outside of the monetary side, right? So if you think of digital art, right?
Yeah.
You know, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, if there was a piece of digital art, how do you know its authenticity? How do you know its provenance? You can now know it because let's say I took a picture, right? I took a picture.
Yeah.
I sold it to you for $1 because you thought it was a $1 value. Now on the blockchain, it says, hey, the picture was taken here. You bought it. Somebody else buys it. Everything is traced. And a lot of like the oldies, if you will be like, what is this digital art? You can copy and paste it. And that was my view initially also when this whole NFT craze happened.
Yes.
Right? Like if you can copy and paste it, what do you care? But it took me a year or so to kind of completely do a 180 on that. Think of like, you know, famous photographers. Don't they sell 100 originals of the same photograph? And it's serialized, and they're worth sometimes millions of dollars.
And और वो भी I think एक shift आया था दिमाग में where we realized that this is worth that $100, and I think the shift for crypto is also on its way, and it's there for most of the people.
100%. And so just and again, like the oldies who are listening or the oldies in the room, right? They might not believe in digital art. They might not be digital natives, but the young generation is digital native. And humans have been collecting things for eons, from cars to baseball cards to, you know, pictures and paintings, etc. So why would we not be collecting things digitally? So I think that kind of use case is there on the blockchain, and whether it happens on Bitcoin or some other networks, I think that's a little TBD.
Okay.
And it's a little bit of a fight.
और मतलब होगा, like all that I'm understanding from our discussion right now is the sooner you accept it, the better for you, because the change is going to happen regardless as the world has moved on to digital. हर तरीके से उसको adopt किया है. This is only a matter of time. I will go back to where you were defining exponentially technology adoption होती है, and that's been the case for many years now. जिसकी वजह से Bitcoin or crypto की overall, the adoption rate also took a very steep curve, and you had just a straight line going up top. और फिर वो थोड़ी सी reaches some form of stability, reaches some form of mean. So एक तो ये हो गया कि शुरू में adoption levels के ऊपर you have a graph that it follows, that all technology adoption follows. But for crypto and for Bitcoin specifically, do they then also have their own graphs which are very predictable, as you said, कि हमें पता होगा कि अगली monetary policy के अंदर क्या आ रहे trends नजर आ रहे होंगे. So is that shift in market very predictable, and that is why we shouldn't be really scared of the dips that come for Bitcoin?
Yeah, so a lot of it's predictable and some of it's not.
Okay.
Right? So in Bitcoin, there's a concept of halving, right? So Satoshi Nakamoto, who was the inventor of Bitcoin, he basically put a cap of 21 million Bitcoin. So there will never be more than 21 million Bitcoin, right? And there's an interesting comparison point to gold, which is basically the strongest asset known to humans, right? In the last 30 years, 50% new gold was found. So the hardest known asset to humans is actually not that hard, right? But guess what? 10 years ago, there were 21 million Bitcoin. Today, there are 21 million Bitcoin. And the next 50 years, there's 21 million Bitcoin, right? And so in that predictability, there was a release schedule that was defined. So you're asking about the predictability of things, right? So from a supply perspective, the release of Bitcoin is coded in. And the way it's coded in is that every 4 years, Bitcoin is released and it's halved. So the first 4 years up to 2013, right? This was the first 4 years of Bitcoin's existence, right? 10.5, half of 21 million were released, right? There was only 10.5 million Bitcoin that were out. In the next 4 years, 5.5 or so were released. In the next 4 years, it was 2.5 or so that were released. And we are just wrapping up the fourth halving, and it's going to finish up in April, and about 1 point something will be released. So you know exactly how many Bitcoin are going to be released. That's supply side, right? And guess what? When it halves in April, the price is going to shoot up.
Interesting.
And so all the exuberance is linked to the halving cycle.
And to when the release cycle is, which you already know when it's going to be. So आपको पता होगा कि dip करने वाला है, तैयार हो जाओ, or sorry, rise करने वाला है.
Right. And so what happens is that exuberance is all depending on demand, right? You know the supply is fixed. Demand side is not. So what happens is that it feels like Bitcoin's a whale and crypto are all these little fish that kind of hang out with it, right? Yeah. So when Bitcoin goes up, the fish go up, right? And the fish sometimes, overextend, and then there's this dip, right? And so if you follow prior patterns, the last 3 or so halvings, right? Basically there's massive jumps. So right now Bitcoin's trading at 44,000. When the halving happens, the supply is going to get halved. Yeah. Right? So now you put on your traditional economics hats on, right? The price is just going to shoot up.
Yeah.
And it's a fascinating time that we're in, right? Because in America, which is the biggest financial market in the world, the ETF is just about to be approved. There's a lot of signals that it's just very close. If it's not approved now, likely in June, but 99% will be approved in a few days, right? Once that's approved, there's $35 trillion worth of retirement funds that are going to have access to Bitcoin. So very much like in 2003, the gold ETF was approved, right? Where if a retirement fund wanted to buy gold, they would have to validate, is it authentic? They would have to store it, secure it, move it, sell it. It's painful. So you couldn't easily, invest in gold. So when the ETF was approved, all these retirement funds bought the gold ETF. And guess what happened to the price of gold? It shot up. So this is exactly what's happening here. But what's interesting is, and this is again, traditional economics, right? If you count up the numbers in that graph that I was just showing you, 19.7, 19.8 million Bitcoins have been released. There's only 1.3 million left. The people who are holding the Bitcoin aren't selling. So there's going to be I think the mother or the father of the squeezes of the world, right? You have this many Bitcoin and you have $35 trillion of assets, whether less than a percent point come. Eventually a percent point come, 2%, that traditional allocation, right?
Yeah.
People allocate to real estate, people allocate to gold, people allocate to equities, people allocate to bonds. Why would you not allocate a little bit to this? So initially it might be 0.1, then 0.5, then 1, then 2, then 3. But they're all going for this little space. And this doesn't include, by the way, corporations who are putting their cash and their balance sheet into Bitcoin. It doesn't include sovereign wealth funds. It doesn't include other individuals that are going to be looking to protect their wealth. So as this happens, guess what happens?
Prices go up, market goes up, and there's scarcity of what we're trying to get at.
And then there's exuberance. So then it will overshoot. So I have no idea what the price is. That's the variability. Let's assume for a second that the price over the next year and a half is at 150,000. Does the market end up at 200, 250? And then people are going to scream bloody murder and it's going to come down and people are, Bitcoin's over. Because this has happened the last 3, right? It shot up to 19,000, fell to 3,000. And people are like, Bitcoin's over.
I'm glad you brought up because I was going to be stubborn and asked you to go back to the charts that we had. and then talk about those.
Yeah, I love it. Well, we'll do the chart. So just let me finish that thought. So 19,000, it came back to 3,000. And people are like, oh, why didn't you sell your Bitcoin? Why didn't you sell your Bitcoin? It went from 3,000 to 65,000 in this last round. We're like, why didn't you sell your Bitcoin? Why didn't you sell your Bitcoin? Because it fell from 65,000 to 16,000. Guess where it's at today? 44,000. And then I think people like me on the Bitcoin side think that from 44, I don't know, 2, 3, 400, God knows. And then it'll pull back. And we'll do this exact same repeat, right? That exuberance. And then every 4 years, this will happen until it becomes a bit more normalized, right? And we go from there. So let's talk about the charts.
Yes.
And this is research I've done over the last 2-3 months. A lot of us in Bitcoin think about how Bitcoin's a little bit of a rabbit hole, and I've been in it for 10 years and I keep learning more. And once I put these charts together, it's like, you know what, for me, if there was even 1% doubt, that doubt's gone now. Just because of the compounding nature with which it's happening. And if we get to, so let's start with the market cap chart, right? Where was it 10 years ago? Where is it today? And it's an annual compounded increase of 63%, right? Annual compounded, not 63% over 10 years, it's annually compounded at 63%. And this is over a time frame that I've kind of picked over here, right? And it's a massive, wave, right? I lived through the internet adoption in 1994. I was a young one at LUMS, and I was maybe one of 12 million, I calculated, people who had access to the internet in 1994. And we saw internet adoption go to billions over the next 10, 15 years in the 2000s. We all lived through the smartphone revolution, where let's say 1 million people had that original BlackBerry, original iPhone, 2006, 7, 8, 9, right? And then slowly but surely, by mid-2015s, everyone had a smartphone, right? Yeah. Billions. So that adoption pattern, and that happened in a similar way. And if we go to the next chart, we look at, market cap. This is an argument that I hear a lot from people where like, oh, what's the use case? The use case hasn't been defined. And a couple of years ago, I was still iffy. I still love the tech, decentralization, right? I'm a techie at heart. So for me, it's very easy to geek up around this, right?
Yeah.
But then it was like, okay, hey, what is the actual use case, right? And the use case that I think is now, like in my mind, like 100% done is a store of value use case. And the store of value use case, like I was mentioning the gold example earlier, right? That you store value digitally and you store it into Bitcoin. So Bitcoin is at an $800 billion market cap. This is not, like I mentioned earlier, not a niche little product, right? This is right up there with the other companies like Tesla and Google and Nvidia, etc., right? And so it's just a matter of going up and up. Gold's market cap is 12 trillion, right? So it's just a matter of time before this 800 trillion goes to 12 trillion. So that's a 10x from here, right? That's 40,000 to 400,000. And this is not counting all the other stuff that's going to happen around this. Like the point I mentioned earlier was, if I'm moving money like gold, if you're in New York and I'm here and I need to send you some money, can I send you gold? No, but I can send you Bitcoin and I can send it to you instantaneously. And there's nothing in the middle. And we live in Pakistan. I do a lot of transactions from my New York bank to Pakistan. It takes me 3-4 days to transfer money. And I'm paying 40, 50, 60 bucks for a transfer, right? There's a solution called Lightning that's coming on top of Bitcoin. And it will take a cent to send a transaction. And it's immediate. There's no days. And God forbid it's a month end in Pakistan. They'll hold your dollars over here, right? It's a joke, right? So that was the market cap side of things. And if we look at the next thing, which is around transactions. Okay, so here's another exponential pattern, 34%. We are nearing 1 billion transactions on Bitcoin, 1 billion with a B.
Yeah.
And every year, 34%, it's increased. And you can see, so everybody talks about volatility, etc. Show me the volatility on that line. There's no volatility there. Yeah. The transaction count is going up like this.
The numbers don't lie.
That's exactly it. So, and I'll show you a few more charts. And after this, it's kind of like game over for me in terms of thinking about like, hey, Bitcoin's just, is just here to stay. It's not going anywhere. If we move on to the next chart, the number of Bitcoin wallets. So this is an interesting one, right? And there's some parallels, but it's not like a crystal clear parallel between number of users on the internet, number of smartphone users, and number of wallets reflects how many wallets there are with actually Bitcoin in it. All right, so this was the number of Bitcoin nodes, right? Which is basically the number of people that are maintaining the ledger, and it's about this much hardware. It's a little hardware CPU called Raspberry Pi and an external hard drive. You put it together and you can run the entire Bitcoin ledger. So this is, what another thing that most people don't understand. You don't need like this amazing capital investment. You don't need, like to buy like crazy hardware or cloud computing. You can just small hardware. You can run the entire Bitcoin ledger. And this is mind-boggling, right? That this is what the decentralization is.
It really is.
Right? So there's 5,000 people who are running the Bitcoin node a few years ago. Today there's 16, 17,000 people running the Bitcoin node. And this is securing the ledger, connecting it, etc. And this has been moving at a 21% annually compounded rate, right? So more and more people are kind of jumping in. And then hash rate is a bit more of a technical concept around mining. And mining is what protects, Bitcoin. It's basically the way the fundamental algorithm for Bitcoin is something called proof of work. If you can work on something, then you have the right to insert a transaction into the blockchain network. It's not anyone can do it. Nobody's going to like spam, right?
Yeah.
Anyone can spam anyone, right?
Yeah.
Here you can't spam. You have to actually do some work, which is you have to run some, puzzles and mathematical problems. Once you solve those, you have the right to validate the transactions. And so that solving is reflected in something called the hash rate. So more and more people are basically joining this revolution, and you have literally billions of dollars of infrastructure. It's depending on how you calculate it, this is as big as 500 of the biggest supercomputers, right? I'm just giving you a rough ballpark. A massive amount of compute power that is also protecting the network. So between the nodes, between mining, the blockchain is like this maintained immaculately, perfectly, right? And hash rate has been annually increasing at 109%. It's just amazing how the growth trajectory. China banned mining a year and a half ago, and there was a dip that you can see in the middle of the chart, and then guess what? It's right back up. And it's at like 500 exahash of mining. So another compounding pattern. And then this is, like for me, a fascinating one. There's a concept in Bitcoin called diamond hands, right? And the idea is like, just like diamonds, you would hold something just, very, very securely and protect it, like everything, right? Because it's so valuable. So that's what people do with Bitcoin. People are just not selling Bitcoin.
They're hoarding it, and that's what's also adding to the market.
You got it. So 70% of Bitcoin have not moved in a year.
70%.
People are not selling, right? Some of the Bitcoins are stored in cold storage. They're just taken off the network. They're put off separately, their keys, etc. Maybe we'll get into that another day, right? But they're off, right? And that, so if you look at the chart, more and more people are believing that, hey, Bitcoin is a great store of value, and they're holding on to it, they're not selling, and that increased at 22% annual rate. And what's interesting with this chart specifically is that number can't go, I'll have to do the math on this, but this runs up against the laws of physics because there's only 21 million Bitcoin.
Yeah.
So if you keep going, right? So let's say you reach like, about, 20.5 million over the next 3-4 years, right? That's the number. And if more and more people are holding it, not selling it, right? It's just like this much Bitcoin left.
That's there for trading, and that's being moved around.
Yeah, and everything has a price. Some person who bought a Bitcoin at $1 might sell it at $1 million. But the people who bought it at 40,000 aren't going to sell it at $1 million. And so that's the concept of diamond hands. And this isn't around compounding, but I think there's this narrative that I initially even thought about, oh, Bitcoin's not green. It uses a lot of energy, right? What is it doing, right? And the way I kind of, again, I made a 180 on this, right? Is that, first of all, who are we to judge how energy is used, right? If you, drive a big car, you're using energy, right? Why should I judge you? Somebody flies business class, that's using energy, right? So being green is a human issue, right? It's not a Bitcoin issue. Banking takes energy, right? So what? Bitcoin takes energy. And so that was kind of my first step into it. And maybe my turn was maybe, a quarter of a turn. And then you see charts like this. Bitcoin is actually greener than EVs. Bitcoin's use of energy is more from sustainable sources than an actual electric vehicle, because electrical vehicle can be powered by coal or by whatever other carbon fuel, right? So Bitcoin's more green. And this is another aspect that I'm beginning to spend more and more time on to understand this, is that Bitcoin is actually a buyer of first resort and a seller and a buyer of last resort in terms of energy. So when somebody's putting up a power plant and somebody puts up a Bitcoin mining rig next to it, you can buy first. Automatic, like, hey, demand comes up right now, right? That if somebody's trying to put up a power plant, you partner with them and say, hey, I'll buy power from you. Boom, done. Then it's a buyer of last resort. So a great example is in Texas, right? Sometimes in winter, when demand for heat goes up, right? So the power grid is more geared towards households, right? So guess what the miners do? They shut off their rigs because the power price goes up.
Yeah.
So they're buyer of last resort. So they're actually an equalizer of the power rig. This is the first time humans have invented a technology that you can literally move up or down. Just you can calibrate how much you want to use. If the power price goes up, then hey, decrease the mining. So as an example, in Pakistan, it feels like right now there's this load shedding, right? And it's because there was some canal blockage and there's a decrease in power. Okay. If there was some Bitcoin mining going on, hey, the power prices have shot up, you shut it off. When the water comes back up, hey, use it. So it's a great stabilizer of the power grids. And that's something that, I think people are going to understand more and more of. And this whole concept of ESG, whether good or bad, Bitcoin's a play for sustainability here from an electricity perspective.
It's about improving efficiency and getting to, you can't ever sort of bring it to a zero. So it's just about how much you minimize it and how much, as you said, make something an equalizer rather than that. And I think a salient point is that there is a lot of flexibility with Bitcoin, with things that are happening around it. Just zooming out a little bit from the very interesting numbers that we saw, I think I'm going to have to rabbit hole myself into these. But zooming out for a minute and taking stock of all that we've talked about and all that you have known about Bitcoin over the many years, what is the future of Bitcoin? And I would want to contextualize this a little bit for a country like Pakistan, which is digitally nascent, has a complex regulatory regime, where people right now sitting in those offices don't really understand technology. But at the same time, there is hunger for more, there is want and need for more because we're already scarce of resources. So we are heading in that direction. So what are the opportunities that this can offer as a thing on its own, but also how does it really have ripple effects around us, or does it not? Or the risks for a country like ours might be too high. But I'll leave that for you to give a word on.
Yeah, I think for me, the future is bright. There'll be some ups and downs, but if it follows the historical patterns that it has, the downs are nothing compared to the ups. The ups are way bigger in magnitude, and the downs get a lot of attention, but the ups don't. But just if you look at these charts, the downs are yay, the ups are yay. So. And because of institutional money coming in, more and more adoption. Right now, there's 50 million wallets, and I think the point I missed earlier was that this is going to billions of wallets. Just like smartphone usage was at 50 million, and somebody could have said, like, an oldie in the room could be like, oh no, I like my little candy phone for this reason because it's got touchpads. Just look at the pattern, right? These patterns don't just suddenly go like this. And I think the example I give is, think about the fax machine. The fax machine had this exponential pattern. Email came around and pretty much, let's say, killed the fax machine, right? Sure, a new tech can come around and kill this exponential pattern. But if a new tech doesn't come, this pattern continues. So for people like me, there's such a big moat around Bitcoin that it doesn't feel like a new technology can easily, overtake it. So because of that institutional money, because of adoption, the 50 million going to billions, and the diamond hands that I mentioned earlier, the only place this is going is up. There'll be some downs and ups along the way, but it's just a matter of 200,000, 500,000, then a million, then beyond, right? And even countries are, adopting it, right? So connecting it to Pakistan, right? You've got countries like El Salvador who have adopted Bitcoin as a reserve currency, right? And I think that you have other countries like the Middle East where they're investing in mining. So if Pakistan's like takes a very progressive stance on this, which is a big if, right? Given our our broad set of challenges here, right?
Our general history doesn't really lend itself to that, but we'll assume.
We ban YouTube, right? Oh my God, right? It's just it's not smart thinking. It's not progressive thinking, right? There's an angle right now that even a few $100 million of Bitcoin in Pakistan's treasury could 100x. So just think about it from that perspective, right? It's just Pakistan has a balance sheet. I know we're tight on dollars, right? But linking our economy to a systematic way of money, again, that trust aspect, right? So the example I gave you and I get into a fight, I go to your village, I bribe the Patwari some money, and suddenly I take your land.
Yeah.
It doesn't help build trust, right?
Yeah.
And so the economy doesn't succeed. And right now, like just like the State Bank of Pakistan and 100 state banks of the world are printing money effectively, there isn't a lot of trust in the rupee, or for that matter, for most of these currencies, right? Because we've delinked, like I think 99% of currencies from the dollar, if not all, right?
Yeah.
So there's an opportunity to be progressive and say, hey, you know what? We can adopt this monetary system, and suddenly it changes the equation for where Pakistan's headed, right? So that's kind of the overarching thought for Pakistan as a country. For individuals and organizations, I think there's an opportunity to learn and store your wealth in this space. And the example I give, friends who I'm trying to orange pill, right? That's the phrase to kind of convince people about Bitcoin, right? Is that what's 1% to you of your net worth? It's nothing. If I stole 1% of Hiba's net worth, it's not going to dramatically change your lifestyle, right? So why wouldn't you invest 1% of your net worth into Bitcoin, right? And so you as an individual, people as an organization, whichever organization you're running, right? Like you've got rupees on your balance sheet, you've got assets. Why wouldn't you have a digital asset in your asset book, right? So you're storing your wealth in a much more responsible way, because again, the monetary system is known, right? It's not devaluing, right? The Big Mac meal that cost $3 and now $13, same thing's happening with the rupee, right? So why not store it in an asset that basically retains value, right? And then there's this angle around how whether it's Bitcoin, let's say 80-90% as a big Bitcoin maximalist, and there's this crypto, it's called the Web3, right? And the idea is that Web 2, or let me trace it back to Web 1. Web 1 was when I grew up, right? And I'm an old one, I guess now, where Web 1 was read only, right? You would basically access information on the internet. Web 2 was read and write.
It was interactive as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's
transactional in its nature.
100%. Uber.
Yeah.
I need an Uber comes. I need food, it comes. It's interactive. Read, write. Web 3 is read, write, and own. And it's where you tokenize things. And this is where Bitcoin maximalists will hate this part of it. But I think there's some potential here, and time will tell and in how this plays out. But whether it's Bitcoin or crypto, it's this exponential wave. So we as a country may not have a lot of natural resources, although we could question that and we don't know how to use it, but we have a lot of people.
Yeah.
Right? So what if we train them on, Web3 and blockchain and Bitcoin? So it doesn't matter if you're a lawyer, you're a Bitcoin lawyer, or you're a crypto lawyer. If you're a designer, you're a Bitcoin designer or a crypto designer, and you're designing amazing UX and UI and blah, blah, blah in all of this space. Because the user experience sucks in this. I compare it to, early Netscape and browser days in the 90s. I think most of the audience will not remember this time, right? Where it was crappy accessing the internet, right? And the same thing over here. It's going to get better, and there are going to be amazing designers who are going to do this, right? So we have all these people. Why can't we train them up in this space? Programmers, front-end programmers, back-end programmers, right? And it's this amazing potential. And Uzair Yunus, and we did this report at the Atlantic Council, it presents $100 billion opportunity, right? Over the next 10, 20, 30 years, where the more the talent that we have in Pakistan is trained up on this, right? And how it can basically ride this wave, right? As someone who's young, and it doesn't have to be young, it could be in your 30s or 40s. The idea is if you situate yourself on exponential waves, your career is going to go places.
Yeah.
Right? Just think about when the printing press was invented, right? There were all these people that wrote books, and it was a great skill to have, writing. And I'm sure you made a lot of money writing. But when a new wave comes along, you want to be situated on that.
Yeah.
So this is that new wave. Why wouldn't you situate yourself on that?
I think the number you used is powerful, given the economic crisis that we're going through right now, the unemployment, the inflation, everything adds to it. And I think one thing we were, for one of our projects, we were trying to sort of assess कि कितने लोग यहाँ पे saving करते हैं. The number was dramatically low, and that was formal saving. So informal saving over here, I think that entire population can also be trained, as you were saying, and that not only in investing and using it as their asset, but also the whole universe offers a lot more.
Yeah. I think we've got a massive population, and if you look at crypto adoption index, right, we're like 8, I think. It's a report by Chain Analysis. So we're the 8th country in the world. So right up there, we're above China, below the US. Exactly. There's like millions of people who already are participating in crypto, and it's just how do you energize that? And I think there's another thing around pricing bias, right? Especially with Bitcoin, it costs $44,000. Oh my God, how do I buy 100 rupees worth of Bitcoin, buy 1,000 rupees of
And that's a possibility now.
Yeah, absolutely. You can buy just yay amount of Bitcoin. And because of, the
compounding and everything, it amounts up to a lot more.
You got it. So if you invest 1,000 rupees, it 100x's, that's a lakh. Yeah. If you have invested a lakh, that's a crore, right? And I don't know, like someone who thinks about it on a first principles basis as an engineer, am I storing my money in gold? Just keep 50% supply increase in the last 30 years. Am I storing my money in, Pakistan rupee, which is, 35% inflation over here, if I've got the number right? Am I storing my money in US dollars, where the US just printed $4 trillion in the last 3-4 years in COVID, right? From 30 trillion to now $34 trillion, right? So all of these places, gold, rupee, dollar, I don't know. I mean, they don't look that good. Gold is obviously the best out of the lot, right?
Yeah.
But another guy, Mike Saylor, right? He's a really smart guy. He compares this to like real estate, and not just any real estate, but prime time real estate, right? So if you think of like Fifth Avenue in New York or South Beach in Miami, right? It's pristine real estate. The supply is very limited, right? The price is only going to go up because of all the printing, right? So that's where my head's at on this.
You mentioned orange pill. I think you've orange pilled me quite a bit, but it's been such a pleasure to have this conversation with you, Salan. Thank you so much for giving us your time and taking us through all the numbers. I think really quantified the proof that we needed कि नीचे आ रही है market, मगर परेशान होने की ज़रूरत नहीं है. This is something that was expected and it is going to rise. And I think that's the positive note we would like to end this today. Thank you so much for coming here.
I appreciate all this and thanks for the opportunity to talk to you. And follow me on Twitter, right? I'm going to share more and more graphs and more things as I learn it. I'm just sharing it on Twitter. And again, not financial advice. I want to definitely leave that as a disclaimer, right? You got to do this at your own risk. And people say do it at your own risk, do your own research. And the key is to invest small amounts, so you don't lose the house on it. But thank you.
Thank you so much.
Good conversation.
I know you've actually orange pilled me now. I'm just like, what am I doing with my savings?
Exactly.